we're going to need a couple things for this. In order for us to track, we have to have a source video that we're pulling from information, okay? What was that?
I can track on black.
Yeah. On the Y drive in 2560, there's a 2DTracking folder which you can copy and paste into your source folder. I would not paste it into your work folder because we are working on this and then we are going to output some stuff. So we don't want this work folder to get too heavy.
2DTracking?
Yes, 2DTracking. Drag that or copy that into your source folder. Okay. So our first piece of footage here is this. It's just cars driving. And this is something I found on a website called VidEasy, something like that. It's like free videos, and all you have to do is attribute, if you use this professionally, attribute the creator inside of your credits. We're not going to use this professionally. This is just for us to practice using these tools. Eventually we'll do some more portfolio stuff with them, but the biggest thing is learning these tools and understanding how they all work. Alright, so this is just, it's an incredibly long 2.5 minute video of just cars moving. One of the reasons that this is such a great piece to use is because of contrast. The more contrast we have, the easier it is to track, okay? So if you had a piece of video that was like cars during the day and they're zooming by super quick and there's a lot of motion blur, that's very difficult to track, okay? And so it's not desirable for entry-level people. And then we have some iPhone videos here, which we'll also play with. Now these videos do not go into Nuke. They will go into Nuke, but we don't want to just drop them into Nuke. What we want to do is process them, okay? All of these are compressed files. So when you take a compressed file and you try to open it and try to work on it while you're in Nuke, usually it'll crash, okay? Or you go through the entire process and at the end of it, it craps out and dies, okay? So we don't want any of that to happen. So what we do is we use After Effects as our in-between. So I'm going to drag the cars driving into my After Effects project. Oops. Yes, close.
Import, interpret footage, main.
Okay, so I brought the video in for the cars, and then I'm just going to drag this videos onto the new comp button.
Real fast question, is this...
The frames per second realistically don't matter to us because we are not going to be doing any animation at this point. All we're going to be doing is tracking stuff and adding stuff to it. So let's pretend that we're doing a video and we want to swap it out. We're doing an iPhone, so one of these videos here.
Is this right?
I don't know what it is. There's no fire, so I don't think so. So let's say here, this guy has an iPhone and he's like moving this thing around. We don't care what frame rate we're at. He could go 700 frames a second. All we're going to be doing is matching up his finger, okay? So the same thing would apply to all these other ones. Once we get into ZBrush, Nuke, whatever software we're using. Once we get into Nuke, it's just frames. That's all we're looking at. Yeah. So this is 2.5 minutes, way too long. We don't need 2.5 minutes of footage. So what I want you to do is just find a good like 10 to 15 seconds of footage. When you find a good start of your 10 to 15 seconds, you hit B. When you find the end of it, you hit N. All right, so I get a rough 15 seconds. We could bring this entire 2.5 minutes into into Nuke, but what's going to happen is when we do our tracking, it's going to try to track 2.5 minutes worth of footage, and we don't need that for what we're doing. We're good.
Close off what you want.
You can, but why not just do it here?
I got you.
Okay. Also, if this was an actual piece of footage that we would be using in the industry, they would just give you, here's your 15 seconds of footage I need tracked. All right. So once we have our area isolated, I'm going to go to composition and trim my comp to the work area. Okay, so this gives me exactly that time and nothing else. I don't have any other stuff outside of that. Now, one thing that does annoy me in this, when we take it into Nuke, is the frames right here. So see how our time stamp is still like 31 seconds, 33 seconds, whatever yours is?
What the original footage.
Right, it's what the original footage is. And that really helps if you need to say, okay, you're giving me frame 1000 to 2000, I'm going to give you back 1000 to 2000. For us just playing with this piece of footage and taking into Nuke, I want to reset this back to 0, okay? So under the composition settings, just reset your start time code to 0. Okay, so once we have that, now we can output this sequence to, or this video to a sequence. So file, export, add to render queue, and under lossless, typically you would save this as a QuickTime movie. We don't want to save it as a QuickTime movie. We're going backwards. We're saving this as a TIFF sequence. So under format, TIFF sequence.
No compression or?
No compression.
So TIFF options or just
Nope, exactly what we have, just regular TIFF sequence. Okay. Now this will give us one frame or one file per frame. So if this is 15 seconds, 15 times 30 frames a second gives us that many frames. Okay. So imagine 2.5 minutes of footage that we exported. That would be a lot of frames that we typically don't need. Now this is pretty low res footage. I mean, it's 1920 by 1080, but in Hollywood standards, they would do like 4K, 8K images. So when you're working at that high of a res, your system goes super duper slow. In that case, what they would do is that they would render out several iterations. One, the high res stuff that all the calculations get done on. And then they render out a really low res one that they work on. Okay, so as we click and drag and scrub, that's the low res. When we tell it to do calculations, it looks at the high res data to figure out where all that stuff is. We don't need to do that, okay? So I'm just gonna hit OK. And then for output 2, I'm gonna click the not yet specified in my case. And I'm gonna go to my work folder for 2560. I'm gonna make a new folder called 2DTracking. And inside that folder, I'm going to make a new folder called source footage. Okay, so I make 2 folders. One, this is all my footage that's going to go in there. Okay, because I know the iPad or iPod things are going to go into this folder too, and we're going to have a couple 100,000 files, so we want to make sure they stay organized. So I have my work folder for 2560. I have 2DTracking, that's for my project. I have source footage, that's where my footage is going to go. And then down here where I have the name of it, I'm just going to erase part of it. Now if you look, there's a special thing that it did here. It did the name of the file, an underscore, and then a bracket, pound, 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 close bracket, .tiff. That bracket, bracket, and the pound signs, that's going to be where it's going to number it. So when we render out of Maya, we render name.number.extension. Okay? We want to do the same thing here. So I'm going to erase this first part and just call this cars. And then I'm going to put a dot. So mine is called cars dot bracket 5 pound signs close bracket .tiff. And these are the hard brackets, not the squiggly brackets. Okay? Right. The ones that are next to the letter P, but not the squirrely ones. All right. So that's going to give us our file name cars.0001.tiff for frame number 1. Right? Now it's also going to save it into a subfolder. I want to just name that subfolder something appropriate like cars. And then we hit render. So we're done with After Effects. Let's save our composition. Save as. We'll drop it inside of our source folder with all of our other footage that's there. 2DTracking, I'll just say tracking, whatever. There we go. And what's nice about it is now that we have it separated. Did your station crash?
Yeah.
Okay. Now that we have it separated, if we needed like the audio to match up, we can just take our finished footage, drop it into the same composition, and everything lines up perfectly. Okay? So I'm going to close After Effects because we're done with it. These other pieces of footage, we would do the same thing too. Okay, so in a little bit, we'll get to doing those other pieces of footage as well. All right, so first thing we do inside of Nuke, we set our project up, right? So we come down to our node graph and hit S, and we give our project a name. So I'm going to go to my folder, work, 2D tracking, and I'm just going to call this 2D tracking. You're down here.
You go in the directory first?
Yes.
Oh.
I just tell it where I want it to go and give it a name.
Yeah, I didn't know if
Okay. And then for the project directory, I like to just set this right to that 2560 folder. Okay. So I've set my name. I can come down here and hit S. This brings this up. So I can give my file a name. That's what that does. And then I can set my project directory to 2560. We also, while we're setting our stuff, we'll just set the frames per second. So when you see this here, this area here is where you type your stuff in. This is a filter. Let's say I have 7,000 files in here, and I wanted to filter it based on what I know is in the file. I could type in 2D tracking, and it would filter all the files that have 2D tracking in their name. So you never, for what we're doing, never need to type anything here. We just type it up there. Okay, that's where we put the 2D tracking name. Okay, now we also have our frames per second. We know that they're 30 frames a second, so I'm going to round it to 30 instead of 29.999. We have our full-size format, which is 1920 by 1080, so I'm going to pick that. And then that should be it. Yes. All right, so all the stuff that we've done here is just setting up our project just so that everything makes more sense later on. So you can close your properties. Okay, so now we need to bring our footage into Nuke. So we're going to hit R down in the node graph to be able to read our footage into Nuke. And then we're going to go back and try to find where our footage is. 2D tracking, source footage, cars.
It's not sending me to that folder?
All right, so when you find your footage inside of Nuke, you can see here that it lists all of these as a sequence. So it says cars.pound.tiff 0 through 445. Okay, so it's showing me I have a sequence from frame 0 to 445. If I wanted to grab an individual frame, I could uncheck this sequence box and it'll show me all those individual frames. Okay? So imagine that you rendered something out of Maya and you called it frame 1 or try 1, try 2, try 3, try 4. It's going to think that's a sequence because there's a number on each one of those. Okay? So you have to tell it if you want a sequence to load a sequence. If you don't, then you don't. So now I'm going to hit open. So now I have my footage here. I can connect it to a viewer and look at my footage. So just to test it out beforehand, we hit play and we watch it go through. It's a good time to get your hotkey sheet out or to get a piece of paper and start jotting down things that you're going to need. So like the play button is L, so it might be a good idea to know that L is the play button and the stop button because it just makes your life a little bit easier. All right, and you'll see in mine that there's a green line that's right there. And as I play it, that green line seems to be disappearing and being created at the same time. Any ideas what that might be? Buffer, right? It's my RAM preview just like After Effects would have. So 445 frames getting loaded into the memory eats up obviously a lot of memory. So we can downgrade this just so it goes a little quicker. up here on the top right that says 1:1, that means for every 1 pixel, show me 1 pixel. That's what that means. Okay? So if I click on that and do 1:2, that means for every 2 pixels, show me 1. So it's basically like a half resolution version.
So where's that again? 'Cause I'm having
The top right up here.
So mine has 1:1.
All right, so a couple things that came up as we're doing this. A couple people had their folder, and instead of calling it cars like this, it was like that.
It doesn't like that.
It does not like a space. And so it literally would not let us use anything inside that folder, wouldn't let us get into the folder, and now we can't even delete the folder. So that folder is just there forever now, okay? So we're gonna ignore it. All right, so now we have our footage inside here that we could actually start using. And I set this up here to 1 to 2 just so it loads this, okay? All right, so what we want to do is we want to track something. So in this case, our most contrasted item is the headlights or the tail lights. So that's what we're going to track just to try it out and see what happens. So we have to add the tracking node right after the footage. So I go to the footage, I hit tab, and then I add a tracker.
Where would that be in the left side?
The little arrowy ones?
Oh, the 4 arrows?
Yeah, right there. Okay, so if we go to this tracker, it has a wealth of things 20 times better than After Effects. One of the disadvantages of After Effects Tracker is very limited as to how many trackers you can actually have. In here, we can have an unlimited number of trackers, okay? So sometimes what will happen is you may have 2 trackers in your scene, or 3 trackers, or 4 trackers, and you want to stabilize your shot. You don't want it to wiggle around or do anything. And 4 trackers may be enough. Sometimes you need 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 or 100 or whatever. All right, so sometimes you need a lot more, and Nuke allows you to do that. So right now we don't have a tracker, but what we do have is this menu bar that came up right here, and then we do have this area here where we can add trackers. So what we're going to do is rewind to the beginning, and we're going to add a track.
Is this better at also scale, because After Effects scale tracking?
Yes, this is really good, yes. So now that we're tracking, we have a couple windows that popped up. One is this big window here. The big window is a magnified view of our tracker, which is right there. On mine, it's like in a blank space. You really can't see anything. This one is a keyframe, okay? So right now, my tracker is setting a keyframe. And what we do is we say, okay, tracker, here's the item I want you to track. Now go track it. Sometimes it does a great job, and we have to do nothing else except for say, here's the item, now go track it. Sometimes we have to give it a little nudge every couple frames or every whatever to make sure it goes the right direction, okay? So I have a couple examples you'll see. So I'm going to zoom in here, and we're going to see that we have a couple areas on the tracker itself. The outer ring right here is a search zone. Okay, so that's the area it's going to be searching in. This inner ring is what it's going to be looking for. So imagine that you're a tracker, and I'm going to marquee an area here. So I'm going to just move this over here by these headlights. Okay, make it a little bigger, like that. All right. So that inner one is saying everything that's inside of here, I want you to look for that pattern every single frame. Okay? Now in this case, if we didn't have that outer box, that pattern is all over the place, right? These headlights are not unique to that car because this car has them, this car has them, this car has them, this one does, and that one does. So this inner ring says track this item, and the outer ring says only look inside this box. Okay? So I move this centered to what I want to track. I make my boxes big enough to accommodate the items.
Is it better to go smaller pixels, or is it better to have a wider range? You know, I zoom in on one headlight versus both of them, you know?
Well, if you figure this, with both headlights, you have more ability to track a double set of items, right? Where if I went to one headlight here like this, I run the risk that my tracker is going to say, hey, here's a headlight, hey, here's a headlight, and it bounces back and forth. Okay, so in this case, I definitely would track both of these. Okay, and I'm also thinking about what I'm going to do to this. We're good? What we would do to this. So we're just going to add something to the front of it so that's fine that we're tracking this. This box, it might seem like a good idea to make this box big because we want to make sure it can find it. But if it's too big, it's going to go very, very slow, and it might pick up something else. It might pick up a headlight from one of the other cars. Also, with the size of this box, we need to look at the speed that our cars are moving. So the whole item here is going to change every single frame. If it's moving quick, frame 1 it's here, frame 2 it's here, frame 3 it's over there, that box needs to be big enough to accommodate that movement.
Oh, it reads the next frame also.
Right. Well, no, it's reading it's reading this frame, and then when it goes to the next frame, it'll move that whole box.
If it's too far away,
then it says forget it. Right, it doesn't know where to go.
Oh.
Okay. So it's a balance game. So sometimes just shrinking those boxes helps. Sometimes making them bigger helps. Sometimes the first one bigger and the second one smaller help, whatever. All right, so now we want to track. So up here on the top, we have a new playset. This one here, this play button says track to end. So I'm going to click the track to end button. And what we should look at as we're doing this is this little piece of footage on the top left. That's showing us what we're tracking.
I only tracked 25 frames.
You picked a horrible spot to track. So even though we're looking at this and we have these boxes here, realistically it's looking at that little plus sign. It's looking at where the center of what we're tracking is located. So I don't care how big this is. You can see in this case, as I scrub backwards, my headlights actually go like out of that box. But Nuke is smart enough that it actually like re-registers what our shape is. Okay? So imagine if we get to the point where our tracker just stops at frame 46 or 56 or whatever, we can take our tracker and not move it. I don't want to grab this and move it. What I want to do is just make this bigger. Okay? The size of this doesn't matter. Except for what it's tracking. And if we look at this little plus sign, that's going to be the center of what we're tracking. That's going to be where we're going to get the data from. So as long as that doesn't move, we're good. And then I would just say, keep tracking. And now it's going to go through and just continue tracking that. Now sometimes we have to do a couple things. Sometimes we have to track forward, track to here. And then we have to go past a point because maybe there's an issue. Something happened here that it didn't track good. So then we go after it, and then we say retrack and track it forward here. And then this middle area we have to manually track. We have to manually move those points. For something like this, it actually wouldn't be terrible to do a manual track. If you look at this pattern, look at how smooth that line is of that car moving. That guy is not drunk at all. He is perfectly driving. Some of the stuff you'll see as you track is that little point is going to wiggle all over the place. Okay? Those ones are a little bit more tricky to track because it moves all over the place. But this one is actually pretty decent. Now, he does go off frame. He goes off frame. I can't track him if he's not there. The footage doesn't know what's happening to him at that point, so we don't care. All right, so I just want to make sure you have something right now, just at least like 50 frames that we could then go and play with. So all the stuff we've been doing has been leading up to this information, okay? And if I go to this transform tab and I click and drag, you can see that we have information that it's been writing out. Here's this translate information. And we can use this information to move something else so that it does move with this car. So I'm going to go over here into the blank area, and I'm going to add a, just to change things up a little bit, I'll add color bars. Woo. Okay. That's something After Effects doesn't have, color bars. So I'm going to take these color bars, and I want the color bars to move with the car. Okay, so you remember how we moved stuff on the previous assignments? Transform, okay? So we can hit T for transform. We can hit tab, type in transform. We can go here and go to transform. Either way, we need a transform node. Okay? All right, so we have color bars, which is just our object, and then we have transform, which is how we're going to get it to move. So I'm going to double click my tracker to bring it up. And I would need to copy my keyframes. So I'm going to rewind my footage. I like to rewind things back to the beginning.
I got a quick question. You know, see how you have frame 0 and then frame 46, 2 boxes up front?
Correct.
I have, my first one says frame 50, my second one says frame 0, and my third one says frame 76.
Your first one probably says -50 because you moved it back somehow. You can ignore that one. Okay? -50 is nothing.
Can't delete that?
You can somehow. I think you can just click on it and hit delete, or you can delete one of these. Track reset, clear offset. There's a button somewhere that deletes them. But keyframe, there it is. So delete keyframe right there. But you would go to frame -50 and then delete it from that point. All right. So we have our color bars. We have our transform. I have my tracker double clicked. I need to copy this animation. Okay, so I went to the transform tab. I'm going to go to my translate, and I'm going to right click on the little graph and say copy animation. So copy animation. Okay, right click right on the graph, go to copy and copy animation. I'm going to double click my transform, and guess what I'm going to do to the translate? Right click, paste, paste. There's two, right? There's paste absolute and there's paste relative. Absolute is a kind of vodka, nothing to do with this, but it means the absolute values, okay? And everything else is relative after you've drinking. For what we're doing, we can just paste absolute, okay? So paste absolute. All right? So essentially what that means is, let's say our color bars are right here and our tracker is over here. Absolute moves our color bars right to where those values are. Relative keeps the tracker or the color bars where it is, and it just moves it relative to where it's at. All right. The way we're going to do it is we're going to have two transforms. One of them is going to allow us to adjust it. Another one is going to be the animation. All right. So our color bars are now moving with it, but we can't see it. So how do we get our color bars and our read together? Merge. Someone said merge. All right. So we're going to merge what's going to be A and what's going to be B.
Merge? What was it? How to keep that?
M. M for merge. And C for, or K for copy. All right. So how do we, which one is going to be the A? Color bars, because it's going to be on top. And then which one's going to be in the bottom? B. And then we view it. It is very large, okay? But if we hit play, it moves right with it. Okay, it moves for as long as that animation is, it's moving. A is the color bars or color wheel, and then B is the tracker, our footage. All right, so now what we need to do is we need to adjust the sizing of our color bars. So I'm going to go to the color bars here before the transform, and I'm going to add another transform.
Real fast, what was the hotkey you said to move two at the same time?
Alt.
Color bars and transform?
Control, sorry, not Alt. Yep. So, what was that?
You got to be lower.
Correct, lower. So now we're getting a lot of different icons on our screen, and it's going to get confusing. So I'm going to close down all my properties and just open up that last transform.
Are we putting something in place of it?
For this, no. For the other stuff, we will. Okay. So in here, I have my color bars, and I have my anchor point here. So if I scale this, just so you can see it before you do it, it scales right there. I don't know why it reset itself, but that's exactly what I wanted it to do anyway. Okay. Now if I needed to move this thing, I can move it wherever I need to. So I need it to basically here. I need this to be scaled down. I'm setting it basically right on top of those headlights. Okay, because I want to see if this piece of footage is going to move with the headlights. I can hide that. And then I can hit play. And then I should see that color bar is moving with the headlights. All right, so if we look at this, we can see that it works wonderfully. Our footage tracks perfectly with, oh, where'd you go? It was tracking perfectly with it until I left my computer station. I blame all of you. All right, so let's delete that and let me do that again. Let me rewind. Let me go to my copy animation. Let me add a transform, and I will paste my animation on here. Let me close all this stuff. Let me add a transform. Let me scale it. Oh, I just messed it up somehow.
Do you also need to copy the center?
I shouldn't, because the center, in this case, it shouldn't be moving, is it?
No, I don't know, maybe.
Yeah, no, so my center's not moving. Just that, -5, this, reset.
So scale is, and do we have to do a different tracker for scale? One tracker doesn't.
What? We would do another tracker for scale, yeah. I'm just trying to see why this one's not playing nice. Tracker. And you can see they're lined up perfectly. Oh, you know what? I think I put it on the wrong car. There we go. That's why. I had it on the wrong car and I was following this car. Never mind. So it was perfect. You guys distracted me.
Are you sure that this little checkbox isn't for transform, rotation, and scale?
Patience. Patience, young one.
Yeah, hope the tracker look for scale.
Okay, so right now we have 1-point tracking. So the way that 1-point tracking works is it just follows one item wherever it goes. Okay? So if we wanted to just track position, we would use 1-point tracking and it would do that. Most of the time that doesn't happen. Okay, let's pretend our camera is shaking, right? So it's rotating side to side. In order for us to track rotation, we can't use 1-point tracking, because what would happen is our car is like this and then all of a sudden it's like that. Our tracker is staying like this. Okay? So regardless of what rotation does, it stays exactly like this. So in order for us to worry about rotation, we need 2 points. Okay? So 2 points allow us to track rotation. So I'm going to go back to my tracker. I'm going to ignore this merge. Okay? So I'm just going to set that merge over there. I'm going to view just my tracker. And I'm going to go back to my tracker folder here. Okay? So that's what Jason was alluding to, is on the far right it says TRS, tracking, rotation, and scale. But I don't have enough information for tracking, rotation, and scale. I need to track 2 points to get rotation. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn off tracker 1, and I'm going to turn on a new track. And I'm going to track something else inside the scene. So in this case, I'm going to track a completely different item. I rewound also, so just to make sure you rewind. So I'm going to track this car's headlights. Okay, so I set my stuff up, I hit the track forward button, and I let it go and do its thing. All right, so once we have 2 things tracked, all right, so for this, we have 2 tracks here, and just by coincidence, both of my tracks went to about 116. That's not always the case. Okay, sometimes it'll go from like 0 to like 118, and then the other one goes from 0 to 100. Sometimes you have to do manual tracking. Sometimes you have to play with it. Sometimes you have to move stuff around and whatever else. So In this case, we're typically getting pretty good results. For most of these, it's going from the start of it all the way through to where it's off screen. When you get to other stuff, it's not going to be this easy. Okay, I chose this piece because I wanted that first one to be pretty much easy. Okay, so this is on here. So now all these buttons on the far right, that is what we're telling Nuke to do. Okay, so if I wanted to use track 1 for translate, and I wanted to use track 2 and track 1 for rotation, I can do that. So I have to say that you have to check both of these. Okay, so I'm grabbing all 4 of these items here in order for us to be able to track both of those items. Okay, or to use both of those items for information. Okay, yes sir.
When we initially did the first one, the T was X'd.
Correct.
Was that by default?
Yes, it was by default because it knows you're going to use the information somewhere.
But it's not going to pick rotation or scale.
It won't pick rotation because you need more than one to do rotation.
Same with scale or no?
Same with scale. Scale, we actually need, you can get by with 2 sometimes, but usually you need 3. Okay?
It doesn't pick your pixels and read how large they're
Nope.
getting?
That's the next one. That's planar tracking when we get into that.
Oh.
Okay? But I want you to see this because this leads into that.
So, but from here on out, we have to assign it, like what we're doing right now.
Correct. Right. At this point, we're assigning it. This is what you're doing. You're tracking, or you're being used for tracking or rotation or whatever.
Yeah, I got you.
Now, sometimes, let's say that I had, I'm going to jump to a website. So just so you can see this is where I got these videos from, VidEasy. Hopefully this is the right website. Yes, it is. Free HD stock footage in 4K videos. It's free to join, free to download a bunch of stuff. What's that, Shutterstock? That's the website?
Yeah.
Yeah. Shutterstock advertises on here, so you have to skip past their videos, which are pay ones, to get to theirs. So if you just ignore that. But they do have some pretty nice videos in here. So let's say something like this guy.
I'm going to track his fingers and
Not his fingers yet, because we can't really see his fingers. Let's say we wanted to add something to this. So there we have rotation. As long as he's in this plane and this thing is rotating, that's fine. We could just do 2 points and it'll track the rotation of that. But when he starts turning it like this and pulling it back, now we're getting into more like perspective and scale. For that, we need at least 3 points, okay? And the trick with anything like that, the more points, typically, not all the time, typically the more accurate we would get, okay? So sometimes we would track stuff like, see these icons here? Pretty distinct. We could track each one of those things to see how it's moving and rotating and whatever else. We could also track stuff here. As long as it's in the same plane and doing the same kind of thing, we could track all those items together. If we have one item here and one item back there, that's 2 different items. Okay, we can't track those because they may be moving prospectively differently.
you can't track them together like we're about to do.
Correct. Okay.
That's pretty cool. All these are, so as long as you cite that you got them, you know. Like,
Right. Professionally, if you want to use them, then you have to cite it. Here's another traffic one. Again, this one's a little bit harder because those cars are so small and there's not a lot of contrast inside the scene. They also browse by category, which is kind of neat.
Sweet. I'm going to go on here and use a bunch of stuff.
There's more of that. There's guitar, record. There's a good one. Let's say you want to add something to a record spinning, right? There's so much motion going on in here, there's no way for you to tell the computer, I want to track this record spinning around, because you can't. There's not enough data there. There's not enough information. There's no video even showing. Now, just so you know that on my home computer it worked pretty good. All right, so there's this one. Now, there's another one that's free stuff. You don't have to cite this. Camera work. So this is a website called HollywoodCameraWork.com, and they offer tracking plates and green screens that you could download. And these are free. Now, the reason that they're free is because the company creates these things and sells them. And if they find one that's junky, instead of just tossing it out, they give it out for free. So the keyword there is if they have one that's junky, that they give it to you for free.
Let's see how junky.
Right. So it's not horrible, but it does give you an ability to kind of learn some of the stuff. So here's a great example of something where we may want to track and replace something that's on there. So in this case, they have all of these blue markers on this green plane because we may want to track, we have a piece of art we want to put on that picture. So we could track each one of these, and it would track the rotation, the scaling of it, how far it is from the camera and all that, and also the position of it. So using all of those points in there would give us a pretty accurate depiction of what that item is doing. And we could take a picture of art, drop it in there, and now match it up perfectly, and then we'd be good. Okay? We'd also have to remove the green screen so that her hand is not in the way. All right, there's also another one like this, which doesn't have any tracking points on it, but each one of those intersections of that cloud is a tracking point. Okay? So in that case, we'd have to be a bit creative and start tracking these little bubbles. We have this license plate. Same thing where we would have these corners of the license plate or the letters on the license plate that we could track. The U-Haul here, if we wanted to replace the U-Haul logo or the back of this, we could find spots on there that we could track and replace those items with other stuff. Here's a laptop, very similar. Here's a picture frame, again, very similar. Okay, so tracking stuff is all over the place.
These are all free?
These are all free.
Go back up to the one. Did it look like a Star Wars scene, the next one up?
This is a dinosaur T-Rex scene. So they have, it's kind of neat what they show. Here's their final footage. That footage, a final rendering. That kid looks totally fake. And here's their actual footage that they used. Now in this case, you see all these little dots, dot, 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 dot. These are all like white balls, ping pong ball type things they've put throughout the scene to help them 3D track.
And what later we composite it out?
Right, and later you would pull those things out of there.
Well, not literally pull them out.
Right.
Them up.
Clone stamp, yeah.
Light 'em on fire.
So there's the kid running. Then here's the 3D work.
Well, they give you all these, so you can kind of just play around.
They don't give you this, I don't think. I think they give you the footage, and then you can play with it. And then here's the ambient occlusion pass.
Now, how good is all this footage? Normally pretty high.
No, it's actually pretty good. It's 1280.
I'm going to be doing a lot of that. 'Cause one thing my reel, anything I do is missing is footage mixed. And I don't want to have to go film it all myself.
Right.
Crap.
Smoke and whatever else.
Just need to show them compositing effects.
Yes, sir.
Like when a dinosaur comes on its move and it take a bite out, how would you break that apart?
Well, here, how would you break it? That would just be like we did the building.
It's a collision.
Right. It's a collision object, and it just hits it and breaks.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, so there's lots of stuff here. I guess they do give you the footage. I don't know if they give you the actual CG parts. But they have a lot of different things here that you could use for tracking 2D, 3D, whatever else.
Like that,
Sunglasses.
gun for it. That's pretty
Right.
cool.
So lots of cool stuff on there. Okay, so for this, we are tracking and we're telling it we want to do translates and rotates. So once I've checked these 4 boxes, I'm going to save because my spinning wheel is moving. Once I've checked those boxes, you'll see that now I not only have translate information, but I also have rotate information under my transform. Okay? So now if we think about it, like we have this translate information that we have from tracker 1, we have translate information from tracker 2, and then we have rotate information that's based on both of those items moving. So where is this translate information coming from?
Both of them, they're doing math.
Right. They're doing the math. They're averaging out both of those movements to figure out how it should move.
We didn't have to press track. It automatically looked at that one, looked at this one, and said,
Right. Find the average.
yeah.
Okay, so now if we were to go back and take this transform information and apply it to our checkerboard or whatever it was we chose, it would basically try to meet in the middle of those two things as to how they move. So now let's try it out just so we can see it. Okay, so I'm going to hit the space bar here just to make this bigger, because I'm going to organize this a little bit. There we go. Oops. All right, so what I want to do is I'm going to grab all of this stuff, Control C to copy it, click off, and then Control V to paste it next to it.
Yeah, so hold on. You're lost in the...
So all I did was I went to my tracker, okay?
One. Yeah.
I have one tracker,
Yeah.
okay? I copied this translate information, and I just pasted it on my tracker for the new link that I just set up, okay? So right here.
You pasted your tracker to transform.
Right.
So your transform 2 has nothing.
Transform 2 is not, this is just me realigning it with the car.
Oh, I guess I missed that.
Yeah. Well, it still works because your things still move with it. But that's all this one is just lining it up with the car. That's what 3 is.
It was off.
Right, and I just moved it over. Okay, so of course this is going to seem confusing because we got a lot of stuff going on. We have trackers and transforms and all these things, and we're copying values. But the biggest thing is that we just have to break down the fact of what we're doing here into simple terms. So we have our piece of footage. We tracked it. So one tracker follows this car. And that information is just translate information. So we just saved it out. That's what this one does. Okay? So all this one does is just move those color bars in line with that car. It doesn't rotate it as it comes. It just moves it along there. So then we went back to the tracker and we tracked another car so that we would have 2 points moving along this view. Now we could have rotation. So this information we just pasted onto this transform here. Just so you can see what I did or would have done from scratch. Whoops. Is I would create a color wheel, let's say, or bars, or doesn't matter what. I would create a transform, and I would go to the tracker and just copy the animation. I go to the transform, and then I would paste the animation in there. I would go to the tracker again. I would copy the rotate. I go back to the transform. I would paste the rotate.
So you have to do the rotate also separately.
Right.
Oh, I didn't know that. I thought it had it all in one.
Nope, because translate is just X and Y. That's all it is. And then rotate obviously is rotation. So now if we were to look at the color wheel, I shouldn't have picked the color wheel. Why did I even do that? It should rotate some. It's rotating a little bit. Let me pick something different. There we go. All right. So now if we look at the color bars and I look at it, you can see that there's definitely a rotation happening between these two. All right. So now at some point they may not be linked up, and what happens is they just kind of ignore that value. So remember, one tracked to like 114 and one tracked to 116. So that difference of 2 frames in mine, it just doesn't do anything for those values. It just does what it can. Because I'm just showing you how I would get back to doing it all over from scratch. Okay, you're not doing that. I'm just showing you that. Okay. So then I would add a merge in here. So this would be my A. This would be the B. I would view the merge. And then I can't see it because these things are lined up with each other right on top. So I could go to this transform just so you can see it. I could go to this transform and I could scale this transform down, and it would scale down, and then I could see my stuff. But I like to have this transform be clean. I like to leave it just my tracking data, nothing else. And then I like to go to a new transform. So I add a new transform. And then I can scale this down and position it where I want it to be. So let's say this is between these cars here. So now when I hit play, you can see that motion. Now just so you can see it again, let me see which two pieces I'm tracking here, because I forgot. So I have this car and that car. So I'm going to go to my transform here. And just so you can see how this is affected, I'm just going to... Come on. No. I'm just going to rotate it. There we go. And it's basically covering up the two cars right now. So what should happen is that it should just follow those two cars. Okay? Now one car is way over here, the other car is way over there. So it's still pointing at the two cars, but now we've lost that length, that strip of the size of this should obviously get bigger. If I were to go through and hit scale here, it has some information for scale, but it could use more information in order to make it a little bit more accurate. All right. So just by checking on scale, you see that I now have a scale attribute that I could right-click and copy, go to my new transform 3, right-click and paste.
So you did scale?
Right. I just checked it on just to see what it would do. And if we look at it now, woo, that's actually scaling and like coming at the camera, which is obviously not right. Let me see where my center is, because I also need to, when I scale things, I also need to take the center. So then I'm going to copy the center, go to that transform 3, go to the center. And now if you look at it, there we go, gorgeous. Now if you look at it, you can see that these things are definitely following and rotating and scaling with these two cars as it comes. Okay? And keep in mind, this is just a placeholder. We wouldn't actually have color bars flying down the street with this thing. We would have any number of other items doing that besides this. I may have, if this is a movie, you ever seen the shows like Fringe, where they put like the lettering right inside the walls or right inside the floor, right on the streets? Same kind of thing. We're doing credits for a movie, maybe we have text all over the place. So we can do that same kind of stuff all over here. Okay? So what I want you to do now is I'm going to stop the lecture portion of this. I want you to play around. I want you to practice tracking stuff and then taking that animation and applying it to transforms and merging it in. I want you to do this kind of thing that we've just done at least 5, 6, 10 times. The more you do this, the more it's going to sink in. The easier you're going to understand this stuff. So when we get to some of the more advanced things, all of that becomes easier to do.